likely gets convicted, you see, he could have pled out on that case and he could have gotten a fine or he could have gotten some type of misdemeanor sentence in his orientation. He didn't want to do that. He thought that this was good for him politically. And it has been on the margin good for him politically. He's raised money off the case. He calls it lawfare, meaning these are prosecutors going after him to stop him from returning to the presidency, as opposed to just the plain and simple fact that he went over the line and broke the law. And so, he's raised money. It's helped him in the polls. If you look at every time these indictments come down, he ticks up in the polls. But he's ticking up in the polls with a much smaller group of people. So just for the UK listeners, in the United States, the largest registrant group is the independents. So the parties have fallen out of favor with the American people. You have 41% of the people registered now declaring themselves independent. Low 30s for the Democrats, roughly 32.5%. Republicans now are below 30%. They're at the 28% number, and they're declining. And this is primarily because Trump has hijacked that party.
We haven't got long left, Anthony. I'm dying to get your view, obviously, on the election coming forward, because everything you're describing there.
Trump's going to lose.
Look, can you not do the big reveal before I've asked the question?
It's pretty obvious. I mean, he's going to lose. If you want me to, just tell me how much.
Explain why.
Just tell me how much time we have left. I'm looking at the clock. Tell me how much time we have left.
It's a very interesting social experiment. We've got 3 minutes to tell Times Radio listeners why Trump will lose. And who knows, maybe half will be disappointed and half will be happy.
Well, I mean, Trump's going to lose for a number of different reasons, but the main reason
By the way, I'm happy about that.
His base is smaller. It's louder, but it's smaller. Number two, he has no money. He can't raise the money that he used to raise. He told a very big lie about the money that he raised 2 weekends ago at John Paulson's house.
That's the former head of Goldman.
No, John Paulson. That's Henry Paulson. John Paulson is Paulson Investments, but he's a billionaire hedge fund manager. But he's going to lose because he doesn't have the money. And you're getting 5 field offices for Joe Biden to every 1 field office for Donald Trump in the swing states that matter to settle the U.S. election. And then remember, the last piece here, there's a very large group of former Republicans that are going to be arguing the case against him. And radio's fun for me. I'll be doing it in all the swing states, explaining to the people I grew up with, because I grew up in a blue-collar family. My parents didn't go to college. I'll be explaining to them the systemic danger of Trump, and he's going to lose.
This is the weakest criminal case I've seen in 60 years of practicing, teaching, and writing about criminal law. They try to turn a state misdemeanor into a felony by claiming that the reason he paid the money was to violate federal law, but the federal government refused to prosecute. So this is an extraordinarily weak case in front of a very, very strong anti-Trump jury. We'll know better tomorrow when we see how much the judge allows questions to the jury. Right now, the questions are something like this. Do you have such strong feelings against Donald Trump that it would make it impossible for you to render a fair verdict? Well, no juror is going to say it's impossible to render a fair verdict. So we're likely to get a jury that's inclined to convict. So the likely outcome is a conviction before the election and then a reversal of the conviction after the election. Look, I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm going to be voting for Biden and opposed to Donald Trump. But I care deeply about civil liberties and about the criminal justice system and not weaponizing it. And this is the weakest of the 4 cases against Donald Trump.
Okay, so nonetheless, you think he might be convicted on this. Would that mean that he would go to prison straight away?
No, nobody. First of all, nobody has ever in the history of the United States, since Alexander Hamilton paid hush money to prevent his adulterous affair with a married woman from coming out, nobody in history, I suspect nobody in British or American history, has ever been put in jail for failing to report a non-disclosure hush money payment on a corporate form. No, I don't think he would ever get prison time, but he would get a conviction, and that could affect the election. Polls show that voters in the middle are going to be influenced by the outcome of 12 jurors in New York. That seems foolish, but that seems a likely result, and that certainly is the intended result. Remember, the DA ran on a platform to try to get Trump. I wrote a book called Get Trump. It was not an original title with me. It was the campaign promises. many in Great Britain don't understand, and understandably don't understand, what being an elected prosecutor means in the United States. We may be the only country in the world that elects prosecutors and elects judges. We have quite deliberately turned our legal system into a political system. And so we're not getting a prosecutor who's interested in justice here. We're getting a prosecutor who's interested in being reelected.
So is it, in your view, therefore, okay to pay someone a lot of money to stop them revealing embarrassing material about you?
It's perfectly legal. It's also perfectly permissible for voters to take that and hold it against them. If you have nothing to hide, why are you paying money? That's perfectly okay, but it's not a crime. And one of the problems we have in the United States is the line between what we think is immoral and what is illegal has becoming very blurry, but it's the most important line imaginable. You are entitled to do things that are wrong as long as you don't cross the line into criminality. And this line, as reflected by this case, has virtually disappeared. So if there is a conviction, it's very likely to be reversed on appeal, because there is really no crime here. And if there is a crime, it's a state misdemeanor turned into a felony by an improper use of a federal crime, which the federal government didn't prosecute. Also, the state of New York has no jurisdiction over prosecuting federal crimes.
Now, you said you think this is the weakest of the four cases Donald Trump faces. Do you see any others of them resulting in effectively putting a serious spoke in the wheel of his campaign?
Well, if the trial occurred before the election, yes. The strongest case is the classified material case in Florida. There's a smoking gun. We have a videotape of Trump showing classified material, allegedly classified material, to a publisher who wasn't authorized to see it, saying, this was classified. I could have declassified it, but I didn't. That seems to me an admission, but the evidence against President Biden is similar in that he showed classified material to his biographer and essentially said, look, be careful with it. It's classified. And so it's difficult to have a situation where two people running against each other and the current administration goes after the opponent and doesn't go after the person who is in charge of the administration. The cases are different, obviously. Trump refused to cooperate, whereas Biden cooperated fully. But the core of the offenses, the possession of classified material, are fairly similar.
And the other cases, you don't feel that they're going to cause him trouble either?
Well, no, they will cause him trouble, but, there have been self-inflicted wounds. In Georgia, the prosecutor herself risks going to prison for committing perjury about an affair she had with a man she then appointed and gave $700,000 to, some of which was returned to her in kickbacks from travel and vacations. So that's a case which could be strong if it were prosecuted by a proper prosecutor, but the judge didn't disqualify the prosecutor. And the DC case is mired in legal issues. So it's unlikely that any of them will come to trial before the election, other than the one that's coming to trial tomorrow.
Well, I don't think either Joe Biden or Donald Trump are fit to be president. I think it's going to be a bad 4 years for the United States, whoever wins. But I would just say, with respect to Trump, I think he's very serious about getting out of NATO. I think that would be a catastrophic mistake for the United States. But those who say, oh, he's just bargaining with the Europeans, he's just trying to get their defense spending up to 2% of GDP, all I can say is, from 17 months of personal experience, that's not what he's doing. I and probably thousands of other Americans over the years have pleaded with our friends in Europe to spend more on defense because we wanted to strengthen NATO. Trump criticizes those who don't make the target, not to strengthen NATO, but to give himself a ground to withdraw.
The U.S. has elections in November. This is relevant for oil prices being a little bit higher, around $90 right now. A majority of Democrats intending to vote for Biden are closer to the Palestinian position politically than the Israeli position. This war is more likely to go on until November now. It is more likely that the Israeli prime minister will still be in power in November now. And that is a very significant worry for the American president. It makes it a little more likely that Biden loses the events we've seen in the Middle East over the last week. And I am certain that Prime Minister Netanyahu knows that. He understands that if there is a war between Israel and Iran and the Americans are dragged in, we are looking at $150 oil and Trump will win. That certainly is something that Israeli leaders are thinking about. It's influencing their calculation. It's not the only factor. It's not the determinative factor, but it is a factor, and we should talk about it.
If Trump does secure a second term as president, and I'll ask you to be fairly brief on this one, what does that mean for global order? What does that mean for the situation in the Middle East, spiking or de-escalating?
It means more uncertainty. In a place like the border of U.S.-Mexico, it means that Trump will push much harder, much more willing to have economic consequences that are dire for Mexico unless they shore up their southern border and they cooperate more with the U.S. military. And the next Mexican president will do that. So it's a tail risk, but it's likely to be more upside in U.S.-Mexico relations and integration. In a place like Europe, Trump is going to take away aid for Ukraine. He's going to squeeze the Ukrainians a lot harder. That's useful for Putin. It's bad for Europe. And then in the Middle East, I think it's much more uncertain. It's a question of how lucky you feel, because I think that I could see Trump very unwilling to use U.S. military force. I can see him much more willing to use his good relations with the Gulf states to try to pursue normalization with Israel and Saudi Arabia. But I could also see, if he gets angry with the Iranians, he thinks he's being disrespected, I could see him doing something spectacular that could risk a much broader war. So I think that the risks, both upside and downside, become much greater if Trump becomes.
Stormy is incredibly bright and incredibly canny. And, we do speak sometimes in between times, but often we speak when she's got a new podcast to promote or, she's got a new project, which is exactly what, as a journalist, you want people to do. You want them to come to you with, with their stories and their updates. But yeah, we've stayed in touch over the years. And I was very fortunate this time last year when the news dropped that Donald Trump was going to be indicted. And she and I had been in touch for a few weeks because it looked likely to happen. And when it did happen, it was just very late at night in the UK, and I got in touch with her. And it was late at night when she then got back to me. And it was just a very lucky time difference that went in my favour that I ended up being the first person to speak to her.
Now, the affair between the two of them,
I wouldn't even...
And it's not really an affair.
It's an affair.
No.
She alleges that they had one night in a hotel suite together in Nevada, and that there was another incident where she went to meet him when nothing sexual happened. She says there was one sexual incident one night in a hotel room. Right. In 2006.
Okay, so 10 years before the alleged hush money payment as he approached the American election. Right, okay. And over that 10-year gap, did they have any contact at all?
Yeah, she says that he did get in touch from time to time. He would call her. She'd put him on speakerphone to amuse her friends. This is Donald Trump from The Apprentice calling, offering me a slot on The Apprentice again. She says that they did stay in touch over the years, and she sort of thought it was hilarious because she hadn't. It wasn't an affair. He was married at the time. She hadn't sort of taken it very seriously. I think she would say she thought it was a little bit of a hoot that Donald Trump was contacting her. And then, of course, when he ran for president, it sort of had a new perspective.
Well, you can say that again. I mean, what goes through your head if you are Stormy Daniels and you are sticking to your story about this sexual encounter that didn't last very long, if we believe Stormy Daniels' account?
2 to 3 minutes, she says.
And then that same individual runs for president. It's quite something, isn't it?
Yeah, I think surreal would be an understatement. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So we have now a situation where Stormy Daniels is going to give evidence in this trial. It's jury assembly day today, isn't it? So we're not expecting much action today.
We're not expecting much action this week, actually, or possibly even early next week. So the jury selection is going to take quite a while because they do have to be incredibly careful how they select this jury.
How would you?
It's really hard. There are 42 questions that they're being asked, every member of the potential jury, including a lot of questions about whether they've ever attended any kind of Trump rally, you know, what their political affiliations are. It's a very complicated jury selection.
And there are double standards at play here, aren't there? And I'm very conscious that as we talk about Stormy Daniels, she is routinely referred to, and I've did it myself, as adult film star Stormy Daniels. Now, that feels judgmental and that feels very wrong. And I wonder whether any would-be jury member will be asked if they've ever watched any porn, for example. It's possible that they will be asked that. They certainly should be, and they should answer truthfully. But how is she about that label being attached to her?
Well, she sort of thinks it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because she definitely feels that the title has been used by Donald Trump and other people and members of the media to discredit her and to undermine her credibility.
But the hypocrisy is off the scales.
Absolutely, but she feels that if she were a housewife or a school teacher, there wouldn't be... she wouldn't be described as housewife Stormy Daniels, school teacher Stormy Daniels, but because she's an adult film star and director, that is used as a way to cast aspersions on her character. She also feels that it's gone in her favour in some ways, though, because, as she says, she's very difficult to shame. No one's going to be able to put out naked pictures of Stormy Daniels because they're already all out there. So she does feel that in some ways her position and her job and her career have almost insulated her from some of the normal ways in which women are shamed publicly.
But also she is proud of her